Hey, everybody, you're listening to Angelneers, the podcast. Angelneers is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders, where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on how to build and scale startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kujikov, and our guest today is Adam Jackson, a co-founder at Braintrust, a blockchain-powered, nonprofit, decentralized marketplace that connects skilled tech freelancers with enterprise clients like Goldman Sachs, Porsche, Under Armour, and Wayfair. We'll get into more of what all that means as we talk about a better future for remote work. But before we do, Adam, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Hey, Oleg, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get started here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you become a founder and a tech entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. So I started off as a software engineer. Started writing code when I was a kid and then went to study computer science at Vanderbilt University. Graduated there and moved out to California to, join everyone else in the kind of the Web 1 era. This is the early 2000s. When eBay was just getting started and things like that. And I was sort of a software engineer turned entrepreneur. I discovered web-enabled marketplaces at a young age. My first one was a local shopping marketplace that connected local stores and their products to internet shoppers. And we were actually one of the first ones to do that. That business was acquired by Intuit. Spent a year at Intuit as a product manager before starting my second also web-enabled marketplace called Driverside, which connected car owners with mechanics. So again, you're kind of seeing a theme here, connecting folks with local businesses via the web. And that we grew that into a national marketplace and were acquired by Advance Auto Parts. And then my third business in 2012 is called Doctor on Demand, which is a very large video telemedicine service connecting doctors and patients for medical and behavioral health visits via video. I started that company with Dr. Phil, who's a popular daytime personality in the US. And it was a blast working with him. We grew that from sort of a small direct-to-consumer brand into what's now the largest video telemedicine service in the United States. And now I'm on to Braintrust.
Well, tell us a little bit more about how you got started with Braintrust. How long have you been at this, and maybe what gave you the idea?
Yeah, sure. So, I got into blockchain kind of full time in 2016, participated in the Ethereum crowd sale, the Binance crowd sale, really became fascinated by, programmable money, essentially these Turing complete smart contracts that you could, now program the rules of a business or a marketplace into a blockchain and have them be immutable, right? They can't be changed or corrupted or only changed by a majority of the community wanting to change it. And I saw this new construct as a really interesting way of organizing people in a web-enabled marketplace, right? The Web 2 marketplaces, think about eBay all the way up to, the gig economy companies like Uber and DoorDash. They unlock amazing value and bring connecting buyers and sellers, supply and demand, to a whole new level. But there's one kind of dirty little secret with those, and that's they are very capital intensive to start and therefore require lots of investor money, right? So the playbook is typically you raise hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. You use that money to subsidize one or both sides of the marketplace, and then you, if you're lucky enough to build liquidity on your marketplace, you then come out the other end basically an investor-owned network. And those investors, very rightfully so, need a return on their capital. And so where does that return come from? It comes from ever increasing fees on the marketplace. So every dollar that transacts between buyer and seller or provider, dasher and customer is taxed. And that tax goes to the for-profit company in the middle that operates the marketplace. And this is true from eBay to Yelp to Uber, Upwork, DoorDash, you name it. And so what the higher and higher fee, or also known as a rake, what that does is it creates misaligned incentives between the people on the network who make their living there, think dasher or Uber driver or web designer or developer. And it creates a misaligned incentive between the provider and the entity that owns and operates the marketplace. So it actually erodes network effects. And so I thought, look, there's got to be a better way. Having been a creator and an investor in so many Web 2 marketplaces, I thought there's got to be a better way to do this that keeps incentives aligned between the folks who make their living on the marketplace and the folks that own it and operate it. And so that's kind of where Web3 came from. As I call it the ownership economy, and this is another word for it is Web3 that's becoming popular now. So that's what got me into the space is sort of this idea that someday marketplaces could be owned and operated by their users instead of profit-seeking corporations.
Can you give us the elevator pitch for Braintrust? I think you've done a really good job, laying it out. So I think that's just the next logical question. Explain what you guys do.
Yeah. So Braintrust is a global talent network that connects information workers with companies that need their services. To be even more specific, Braintrust has started in IT services. So think about engineers, designers, product managers, project managers, DevOps, backend folks, everyone required to build enterprise grade software. That's who's on Braintrust. And then on the client side, as you mentioned, it could be, there's startups on Braintrust as well, building teams, but we went after large kind of Fortune 1000 enterprises like Goldman Sachs, Nike, Porsche, Nestle, Wayfair, and many other hundreds of other brands, because they have insatiable demand for these knowledge workers. And so we've got the demand side of this equation pretty dialed in. And so Braintrust is a marketplace built on Ethereum that connects these folks. Now, that in and of itself is not a new business model. What is new about Braintrust is its ownership and control model. Instead of being owned by a profit-seeking corporation in the middle, it's owned by its users. And instead of shares of stock, there's tokens. And instead of profit, right, extracting profit out and returning it as a dividend, Braintrust doesn't have that construct. It actually just tries to take as little fee as possible just to cover the cost of operating the network. That way, all that value that was prior extracted by the middleman, the company in the middle, the Upwork Inc. or Fiverr Inc. or whatever, is now just returned to the users. Right. So it's this that's the whole key to Web3 is taking the value that was extracted by a middleman before and giving it back to the users that make their living on the marketplace.
And next, can you explain your mission as a company?
Yeah, our mission is pretty simple. It's to spread economic opportunity more equally and fairly across the world. We believe talent is distributed completely evenly around the world. Opportunity is not, right? Opportunity has been hyper-focused at least in the United States, in just a couple cities, and in globally just a couple countries. And so Braintrust exists to even that out, to allow all the global talent to access all the amazing opportunity.
All right. Well, I want to unpack some of the terms here. Can you actually go over, you've mentioned Web3 a few times. What is Web3? What is Web2? What's the difference?
Yeah, for sure. So, starting the beginning, Web 1. Well, Web 1 was, and we're speaking in terms of sort of, two-sided marketplaces broadly. I mean, just about everything is a two-sided marketplace if you really think about it. But so Web 1 was, hey, let's just connect people online, right? Who wouldn't have found each other otherwise. Craigslist is the best example of that, right? Nothing fancy. Someone posts, someone answers the post, transaction happens offline, done. That was Web 1. Web 2 brought the a little bit better sort of merchandising of those services or products, plus an element of trust through payments and reputation, right? So eBay, PayPal are the best example of the sort of Web 2 pioneers, right? And then on down through the gig economy, where now you can get on DoorDash and look at a vetted list of restaurants and a really nice set of menus, and then someone who reliably works for DoorDash will bring you the order, right? So it's a kind of a three-sided marketplace. So Web 2 introduced trust in payments. Web 3 does all of those things, but gives the margin from the Web 2 operator back to the users. Right. So Web 3 takes all of the genius innovations of Web 1 and Web 2, but takes the profit motive from the middleman away and gives that profit back to the users. That's what Web3 is all about.
And you do this with your infrastructure and the tokens. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, you use shares of stock to accomplish one mission, and you use tokens to accomplish a different mission. So, shares of stock are meant to, they're basically claims on profits, right? If you own a share of stock, you have some claim on future profits, and in marketplaces, those profits come from fees extracted from the network. And it's also very hard to give millions of people in dozens of countries shares of stock, right? You have to have a brokerage account, blah, blah, blah. They're very non portable. Tokens replacing shares of stock change the paradigm in the following ways. One, because the network exists, the new Web3 network exists solely to serve the people that make their living on it, the profit motive goes away, right? So now we don't need a dividend. We don't need, because we're not extracting fees. We're not taking margin away. So you don't need a share of stock anymore. And two, tokens are as easily transmitted as an instant message or an email, and anyone with an internet connected device can possess a token and use it to vote and control a network. And so it's far more technologically portable and superior than a share of stock. And so it's not a perfect analogy, right? It's an upgrade to how people get to connect, to supply and demand get to connect with each other.
All right. So thank you for explaining that. I would next like to talk about the marketplace for freelance work. It's huge, right? So in the global economy, I think it's estimated that there's about a billion or so knowledge workers, or so-called knowledge workers. Freelancers account for some percentage. I have 35% here in front of me of the world's workforce. So it's a huge market, and you could look at that two ways. It's either a major opportunity, or it's also ripe, and it's also a ripe field for many players with multiple permutations of the marketplace concept. So let's start here. Can you explain to me and the listeners how the freelance world is run today? And by today, let's look at that pre-pandemic, because you incorporated in 2018, right? So I imagine it's been affected by the pandemic. But yeah, can you explain how the freelance world works?
Yeah, absolutely. So freelance knowledge work. I'm going to focus on knowledge work here and not offline gig work, just because that's where Braintrust plays. Although there's a lot of similarities between them. Freelance knowledge work has typically been highly fragmented and very asymmetric, i.e., no price discovery, right? So I'll give you an example. The majority of information work is done by big consulting firms that sort of warehouse talent. Think of like the PwC's, Accenture's, Deloitte's of the world. They sort of warehouse talent, and then they rent that talent out to big clients. Usually it's some hefty markup. We've heard anything from 2x to 5x. And so, and then the partners of those staffing and consulting firms, keep that margin as profit, right? That's kind of the old staffing firm and consulting firm model. Knowledge worker labor marketplaces are fairly new and very small, right? So you can think of the two big public companies are Upwork and Fiverr. They play on very small jobs. So Upwork's average job size is a couple $100. Fiverr's similar. And, it's like design me a logo, or, go do some research on the internet for me, or whatever. You transcribe a video for me. Very small kind of one-off jobs. Where Braintrust plays is to liberate the bulk of the knowledge workers that are sort of stuck at these consulting firms or these tech jobs that they don't really want to be at. They're sort of told what to do and when to do it and where to do it from. And we just think that's just an inefficient way for both clients and talent to work in the knowledge working world. And so what Braintrust does is introduce this new model where you can leave your full-time job, come to Braintrust, create an account, get vetted and verify your skills and your work history, which the community actually does as part of the function of the network, and the community earns tokens for doing that. And then once you're verified with your selected set of skills, you can bid on work and do big, ongoing, incredible jobs that you can actually make a living and pay your rent and buy your food with. So I'll give you a few stats here. So the average job size on Braintrust is now $76,000. Average duration is something like 224 days. So this is not like, hey, spend 2 hours editing this podcast. It's, hey, build this giant back end bank software for Goldman Sachs, or write me a product spec for the next version of the dashboard software that Porsche is going to use. These are actual jobs that are ongoing on Braintrust. And so what this allows knowledge workers to do is sort of unbundle out of corporate America and make money, usually better money, on their own terms without paying some Web 2 marketplace rake, right? Because Braintrust has a zero rake to the talent. Let me pause there. That was a lot of new stuff there. I don't want to get too far off course from your question.
Yeah, no, it was really good. I wanted to actually skip ahead. I think it's really interesting. That was a lot of new information. I want to ask, how has this been affected by the pandemic? What have you seen from that?
Yeah, great question, and it's a logical sort of next step to this point is, I'll tell you. So we started Braintrust before the pandemic, when there was certainly already a war for talent. So all corporations are basically competing for the same talent. And so unless you're a Google, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon type of company, you're probably losing the war for talent. And so we proposed Braintrust as, hey, a lot of these people are actually leaving corporate America and they prefer to freelance because of all the freedom, et cetera. So they're on Braintrust. So we seeded Braintrust with several hundred of these folks just from our own network. And so, we would pitch to Nestle, was the first big customer on Braintrust. Hey, Nestle, you can't really get these people full time at your offices. So why not use this, distributed work service called Braintrust Marketplace to find these folks? And they were, they're like, yeah, you got a lot of nods around the room, and but there was still this pre-COVID, this sort of anachronistic thinking around, if we're going to pay people a lot of money, we should really have butts in seats, and they should be using our laptops and sitting in our cubicles. And it was a tough hill to climb. And so then COVID, the pandemic hit, the lockdown hit, and the whole world changed in April of 2020. And all of a sudden, remote work went from a nice to have to the new normal for everyone overnight. And so that was just that was a very unfortunate event, obviously, very sad event. But a silver lining was the whole way knowledge workers work changed forever and irreversibly. So Braintrust's model happened to be sort of in the right place at the right time for that.
Mm-hmm. Right, like when you're talking about this, the only thing I can think of is this whole idea of a great resignation, right? People want to move out of their corporate jobs and find something else. This seems almost like the perfect thing for that. So let me skip to a question I have for later in the interview here. Like, why is now the right time for Braintrust?
Yeah, great question. And the great resignation piece is just another tailwind for this model of distributed work. Talent has sort of the stronger position in the marketplace these days. There is a shortage of talent of all varieties. And so talent can be a little more specific about their demands and what works for them. And what works for them, it turns out, is working when they want, from where they want, at a rate that is suitable for them, and not being dragged into an office. And so that is part of, I think, what's fueling the great resignation is there's now people can freelance, right? Like, and the tools are all there. Zoom is amazing. Asana is amazing. Google Docs is awesome. Like, it's never been easier or frankly, as viable as it is now to be, a sophisticated knowledge worker, and never physically see your colleagues. And so all these trends mixed together gives you, what we're seeing right now.
I like that you approach this. I'm sure you approach it from multiple angles, but you're definitely putting a lot of thought into what freelancers are seeing, what they have to deal with, their side of the equation, kind of the supply side, I guess, in this market, right? So, talk about the key challenges that freelancers face before your solution, right, in the market today.
Sure, a couple of them. So one of them was like sort of displaying your skills and provable work history. I think LinkedIn actually does a reasonable job of this now, but but for some of the other talent marketplaces, like your work history on Upwork is actually Upwork's intellectual property. As crazy as that sounds. So that is the opposite of portable, right? So your jobs, the jobs you've done on Upwork, that does not translate anywhere else. It is inside their walled garden. That's rather unfair. The bigger problem, though, if you ask any freelancer, is how do you find a steady stream of work, of gigs? And this is the magic that the gig economy companies brought to that labor force is, you can't be a freelance delivery guy without an Uber or a DoorDash, right? It brings the demand. Braintrust brings the demand for working freelancers or teams, right? We also have small agencies and things like that. Because here's the thing: if you're a developer, a designer, a product manager, a project manager, a DevOps engineer, you don't want to spend half your time writing proposals and pitching and marketing yourself. I mean, that's like running a small business. Is a lot of overhead of just generating demand that isn't involved in actually doing the work you love doing, right? And so, a great marketplace will bring you the demand. And so that's Braintrust's core value prop to talent is we'll bring you this literally endless stream of economic opportunity from these amazing Fortune 1000 clients that need your skills and will pay you good market rates for your time and skills. Oh, and Braintrust it's a set of smart contracts on Ethereum. It's not a profit seeking corporation. It doesn't need to take as much of your income as it can and return it to shareholders. Right. So, there's your 1-2 punch there for talent.
Yeah. So what you're saying is like freelancers on your platform should make more money based on that decreased margin, right?
They absolutely do. They make more money because they're keeping 100% of their hourly wage.
Okay. Next, talk about the ownership economy. I was reading around a few of your blogs, and this term came up. What is it? And talk about why the way we work today is broken.
So the ownership economy is a term that I came up with years ago, and then one of the great investors in the space, Jesse Walden from Variant Fund, who's also an investor in Braintrust, he started using it as well. And it just means it's the user-owned economy or the ownership economy. They're basically synonymous. It just means networks that bring supply and demand together that are super valuable are owned by their users instead of for-profit corporations, right? So imagine, Uber, instead of being owned by Uber Inc., is just owned by its drivers. And the more you drive and the more reputation you rack up, the more 5-star ratings you get, the more ownership and control over Uber you have, right? And there was no like surge pricing being taken by Uber Inc. and then returned to shareholders as dividends. Now all that goes away. It's just a network owned by the riders and the drivers, and the software is well written, and everything works. And the rides just got cheaper, and more money goes to the drivers, and it can be market driven. So the surge pricing makes a little more sense. So I just get all the middleman BS out of the way and let the users who make their living in or rely on that network own and control it. That's what the ownership economy means.
So where does Braintrust fit in that model?
Braintrust is an ownership economy marketplace for knowledge workers. It connects knowledge workers with clients that need their services, and it does so in a minimally fee extractive way.
And what's the incentive there?
Oh yeah, my personal incentive, yeah. So I am not Braintrust. I'm Adam. I'm one of the dorky developers that helped build Braintrust. I'm a sort of an ideologue of the ownership economy. What's in this for me personally? I run one of the nodes on Braintrust that brings business to the network. And when you do that, you earn tokens, and we're a software development firm, so that the nodes, the folks that make their living on Braintrust, very much for-profit entities. Braintrust itself is the nonprofit, right? So it's almost like if you go back to the Uber analogy, those drivers, they are for-profit, right? They got to pay rent, they got to eat. When we have a user-owned version of Uber software, that software itself is the nonprofit. So that's the distinction there.
It's owned by users and not by greedy stakeholders. Sorry, not greedy stakeholders. I'm sure they're wonderful, but
Well, there's nothing wrong with greed, right? I mean, we have plenty of people who software developers or designers or product managers on Braintrust who make hundreds of dollars an hour and work really hard and make lots of money because they're providing tons of value for clients. Whether there's greed involved there is irrelevant, right? Greed is not inherently bad. What I'm saying is when a corporation in the middle operates a marketplace and its job is to take as much money from its users as possible, you have misaligned incentives. And so the whole point of Web3 is to realign incentives.
I see. I see. Okay, thank you. That made a lot of sense, and I think the misaligned incentives piece is what I was missing. Talk about this compared to the other solutions in the marketplace. What are some of the challenges that Braintrust helps its users with? Both freelancers and the corporations. What do they do better than the other alternatives?
Yeah, there's a few things. Well, one obviously is the obvious economic benefits, right? So Braintrust charges a 0% fee to talent and a flat 10% fee to clients, which is far lower than, say, Accenture billing out a developer at 2x their hourly rate, right? So you have immediate cost savings. So as we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. The second thing would be transparency. So one of the requirements that the Braintrust Network levies on talent is that anyone doing work for the client, any individual needs to have their own account. And so it's a lot of times you'll see agencies bid out work and they'll say, hey, we did the mobile app for Nike, right? The iOS app. And then they bid the client work and the client awards the contract and then says, hey, okay, we want the girl who did, the woman who did the Nike app. We want her. And the agency says, oh yeah, sorry, she left like 2 years ago. And so you don't know who's doing the work, right? And so you're paying crazy markups and you have no idea who's doing the work. So another thing Braintrust really attempts to enforce in this marketplace is transparency. Who's actually doing the work, and then that person can get credit for the work on the Braintrust network and accrue reputation herself instead of it all going to some nameless agency that she works for.
The technology piece is so interesting, but I'm trying to understand really how does the blockchain piece fit into that? The transparency of these contracts and who worked on what. Like, is that recorded on blockchain, or where does it fit in?
Yeah, good question. I always think like blockchain is so technically complex, and a lot of the story of blockchain has been around its amazing cryptography and censorship resistance and security profiles. I would say in Web3, the tech is not the interesting part. It's the new incentive systems, the new ownership and control models. That's what's interesting. So to answer your question directly, Oleg, some of these things can and should be recorded directly to the blockchain, so they're immutable, right? So no one can steal it or overwrite it. And other things just don't matter, right? A lot of the matching from talent to clients, like a lot of the sophistication of the marketplace actually just doesn't need to be on a blockchain, right? It's just that part doesn't matter. Now, token balances, who's earned tokens, how many of them they have, what do they vote on for upgrades to the protocol, all the governance, that stuff can and should be on chain, right? So it's just depends on which piece you're talking about.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into the voting because that's such an interesting part of it. But let's start here. Now let's dive into Braintrust, and we'll start with the people behind it. You've kind of told us a little bit about yourself, but who did you co-found Braintrust with, and what's the origin story of starting it?
Yeah, I co-founded the network with a friend of mine named Gabe Luna Osaseski. Gabe is another kind of very experienced Web 2 marketplace builder, has built and sold many successful businesses in the space. And so we shared a passion for sort of fixing all of the misaligned incentives from Web 2. We're just two people working on this thing, though. So many tens of thousands of people have joined this mission over the last few years, and they're largely people like us, people who prefer to work on their own, freelancers, people who don't really, who kind of reject corporate America and don't want that lifestyle, and don't think that, corporate Web 2 middlemen should be taking, 30, 40, 50% of every transaction they play a host to, in the form of a fee. So it's kind of a movement, right? It's like, if software ate the world, famously Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world, blockchain is eating the middleman. And so that's sort of like, I am a modest co-founder in this marketplace, but I really think all of the thousands of early people here are, really deserve co-founder status as well.
And you mentioned that the governance is controlled somewhat by the tokens. So can you talk about that? How does Talent control the governance? Why is this an important part of your what do you call it? A system, an organization, your business? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a network. So I'll sort of say old way, new way, just to keep it simple. So old way, corporation decides all the rules, right? And corporations controlled by the management team and essentially by the shareholders or the board of directors, all kind of the same. That is top down, centrally controlled hierarchy. Easy to make decisions. One person can typically completely control an economy. Mark Zuckerberg's the best example of that, right? And corporate governance is kind of a joke, right? You could vote your Facebook shares, but it wouldn't matter because only one person's Facebook shares matter, and that's Mark's. Most tech companies are arranged that way. They call it dual class voting. That's old way. New way. Just the rules of the business are written into smart contracts. Those smart contracts can only be changed and upgraded by a majority of token holders voting to change them. Who gets the tokens? The users who built the network and make their living there. So it's almost the opposite of a corporate structure. So let me give you an example to sort of elucidate the difference between these structures. And these are a classic marketplace example. In 2019, this is not hypothetical, by the way. This actually happened, and the New York Times covered it. In 2019, DoorDash rolled out a tipping feature where consumers, people who order food, could tip the dasher, the person who brought the food. They ran it for about a year, and at the end of 2019, they decided, you know what, we need the money. We're gonna keep all of those tips and book them as revenue for the corporation, and essentially stole them from the dashers. Now, it wasn't really stealing because it was written into their terms of service that they can do whatever the hell they want, right? They are centrally controlled. The rules are whatever they say it is. Sucks to be a dasher. Compare that to the new structure. If Braintrust decided to change its fee structure, all the token holders would have to vote, and it would have it happen on chain. It would be transparent. You'd be able to read the vote, read the change in the smart contract. And so if Braintrust voted to allow for tipping, great. That would be an upgrade to the smart contract. It would vote up or down. And then where do those tips go? Well, probably the version of the smart contract that passes is it goes to the user who the tip was directed at, not one person or some central company. And so it's just, when you have a user-owned network, like we've been talking about, the ownership economy, user-owned economy, it's not possible for someone a bad actor in the middle to just steal from everyone else like it is in the corporate structure. And so that's why governance matters, right? Some people kind of joke like, who cares about a governance token? What nobody vote. Like when you make your living on a network like DoorDash or Braintrust, you care about the rules. You care about the fees and where they go. So that's why governance matters.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next, let's look under the hood. Talk about your technology stack and any kind of important choices you might have had to make early on.
Yeah, for sure. We built Braintrust on the Ethereum blockchain, which is the largest Turing-complete blockchain in the world right now. There are others now. I mean, Solana is sort of the notable other one now that we would take a look at if we were just starting now. But we started out years ago. And, back in 2018, 2019, when we were first building, Ethereum was kind of the only game in town. It was the biggest, had the most developers, had the most support for wallets, institutional custody, security, all of those things. And so that's where the majority of, the token, the voting, that kind of thing happens on Ethereum.
How about key milestones? You've been incorporated for, 3 years now? What are some of the key milestones that you've achieved? along that journey.
Yeah, sure. So project was founded in 2018. I wrote a token economic paper, basically describing the user-owned economy. It was really an investment thesis. I was helping run a hedge fund that I helped start called Cambrian at the time, and I was actually looking to deploy capital into this idea of user-owned economies. And we didn't see any, so we decided to stand up Braintrust as kind of a proof of concept. And then it turned into something that I was super passionate about. So I left my GP role at Cambrian and started working on Braintrust full time. Raised a small seed round in November of 2018, True Ventures, Homebrew, Galaxy Digital. And then in October 2020, did a Series A with a bunch more great investors, Multicoin and Pantera and a bunch of others. And then in September of 2021, after we basically built the whole network off chain. So we wanted to build a real business with real token economics, but keep it off chain until, keep it essentially centralized until it had a really strong flywheel spinning, until we knew the value props were solid and everything was working. And then we just, on September 21st of 2021, or September of 2021, we swapped the test token for a real token and hit mainnet. And then, got listed on Coinbase shortly thereafter. And then just the network just kind of continues to grow, more enterprises joining and more talent joining.
Awesome story. Let's talk about the marketplace. And I think you kind of held off right at the right spot. So when you're creating a marketplace, a two-sided marketplace, you need to attract a critical mass, right, of sellers and buyers, freelancers and enterprises. It looks kind of like a chicken and the egg problem, right? How do you get enough freelancers to support your enterprises? How do you get enough enterprises to supply the freelancers with enough work? So how do you address this kind of critical mass problem?
Oleg, this is the hardest part of building any two-sided marketplace is overcoming the chicken and egg, or also known as cold start problem. Where do you start? So I'll tell you, I've been building these businesses my whole life and my whole adult life. And every category of marketplace has a different strategy for overcoming cold start. In my first one, e-commerce, I needed inventory supply. So I went to like 100 local stores here in San Francisco and got them to put some of their popular products onto my website, and then started doing SEO. We were the first ones to do local SEO, and that's how we brought the demand. And so that's how we overcame cold start. With Doctor on Demand, we staffed up in a couple of states with a couple great doctors, and then hit the Dr. Phil show. And then Dr. Phil drove tons and tons of patients, and then we scrambled and got many more doctors on, and rinse, repeat. And before you know it, we had a big, liquid marketplace there. With Braintrust, it was relatively simple, and the level of service with Braintrust is much easier. Doctor on Demand is an instant service, so it was really hard to like keep doctors on and free, and then hit the patients on the TV show. It was an excruciatingly difficult marketplace to build. Braintrust was a little easier. We started with the supply, so we put, I basically recruited the first couple hundred talent myself. I've been a technical person and product person my whole career, so I'm in that community and got lots of great freelancers on, and then we use those freelancers basically as merchandise to draw in the Nestles and Porsches of the world. Those were our first two big clients, and then you ask the first 200 talent to invite the next 1,000, and they screen them each other and bring their friends on, and then that brings on the next 10 clients, and before you know it, you've got a nice flywheel running, and you sprinkle a token in there, and that tokens, I think, are meant to accelerate the speed and strength of a flywheel, right? So if people get stuck at creating a profile because it takes an hour, maybe you have the software reward them some tokens for completing the profile. And so tokens are kind of a nice cheat code in building two-sided marketplaces.
That's really interesting. I get just excited hearing the word token. You mentioned kind of freelancers bringing in the next round of freelancers. Can you explain, and I think you mentioned it before, who's vetting the freelancers? How does that work?
Yeah, this part's important because Braintrust is an enterprise grade talent network. So talent needs to be vetted and verified. And so we vetted, my small core team and a few others vetted the initial people. We kind of already knew them, so it was easy to vet. And then we built a community vetting system that now folks vet folks in the existing already vetted folks in the community actually earn tokens for vetting new people and helping grow the network.
So yeah, it's like this. The network is building itself.
You got it. That's exactly right.
Oh man. Well, who's harder to attract? Who's harder to attract? Is it the freelancers or the enterprises?
We always thought we would be, because enterprise sales is hard, right? Selling into big companies, getting through procurement, legal, insurance, blah blah blah. It's hard work. Anyone who's done enterprise sales in tech knows how challenging it is, especially in talent, right? It's like talent is just this like undifferentiated, red ocean, right? It's so hard. And so we were lucky. We found this val prop where it's like, hey, we have the best talent because we don't charge any fees. We don't charge any fees because we're actually owned by the talent. That val prop actually really hit home. And then COVID helped with, everything being remote first. And so we went from being demand constrained to supply constrained pretty early in our life as a marketplace. So that flipped probably in January of 2021. And now there's essentially unlimited demand on Braintrust, and so the supply is growing quickly. So the whole network is in and of itself growing very quickly, 22-24% month over month GSV growth, but currently talent constrained.
Very interesting. And how does it work for the enterprise side? We've talked so much about the freelancers, but if I am a enterprise organization, I have needs in this product team. Like, how does it work logistically? What do they see? Yeah.
Yeah. The cool part is that this is a tokenized talent network that lives on Ethereum. The clients don't need to interact with the blockchain. That was a key design decision we made, because it's still non-trivial to interact with blockchains, right? It's still a bit of a lift. There's still a lot of friction there, and so you don't want to introduce unneeded friction to enterprise clients who are just looking to find great talent and transact. And so all the jobs on Braintrust are still transacted in fiat. They're still paid for by US dollar, ACH, or wire. The token really comes in, on the governance piece and a few other features, the academy, bid staking, et cetera. So clients come on, they are onboarded by the software, and then usually they'll get an account manager, and then they'll post a role that they need help with. Could either be, hey, just come join my staff as a PHP developer, or it could be, hey, we need to build something soup to nuts, and we want a team on Braintrust. It could be either, so project based or just a group of folks to plug in. And then the talent are notified, and anyone who's got availability and interest will submit proposals. And this is actually one of the uses of the token. If you're in a competitive proposal environment and you want to stand out against, if you're a talent member and you want to stand out against the competition, you could actually stake some tokens along with your proposal. That's essentially putting those tokens in escrow. And if you are awarded the job and end up doing a great job, you get those tokens back. If you are a no-show or a bad actor, you may lose those tokens. And so that shows the client, hey, I'm putting some skin in the game here and I'm serious about doing a good job. So that's a use case for the token to actually build your business as a freelancer more quickly by staking tokens along with proposals. That's something that's been, the concept and implementation has been evolving through our governance process over the last few months here.
Okay, I want to talk about the business model, because you are a nonprofit, right? So how does your business make money, and can you talk about this from your stakeholder perspective? Is it important for them that this makes money?
Yeah. So again, back to the different parties here. The users of Braintrust are very for profit. The designers, engineers, developers, product managers, the little agencies that are on Braintrust, all very much for profit. The Braintrust marketplace itself is just software and a bunch of smart contracts. And so it is a nonprofit. Smart contracts don't need profit. They just connect buyer and seller and get out of the way. So that's sort of the delineation there between nonprofit and profit entity.
Okay, but you raised money, right? You have a roster of crypto and traditional investors that backed Braintrust. How do they make their return on their investment?
Yeah, so they bought tokens early on in the project's life, under the belief that those tokens, based on the token economic design of Braintrust, could be valuable someday. They won't be profit return mechanisms. There's no dividend, again, because there's no profit. But imagine, I liken tokenized networks to the open source projects of Web 1, like HTTP, which runs all websites, or SMTP, which is the mail protocol. Those were nonprofit open source projects that no one made any money off of, yet power the entire internet now. Blockchain tokens take open source nonprofit projects and add a financial layer to them, right? A sort of an economic layer. In our case, it's the voting mechanism. And so the value of that token is sort of like, hey, it's directly related to the control of the network. And so we had some very forward-looking investors who were like, what if you could own a piece of a protocol that connects knowledge workers with clients? That could be interesting someday. Now, what's the valuation framework? What should that token be worth? Those are all sort of open, debated questions. But that was, that's, I think, the motivation the early financiers of the project had.
Okay, thank you for explaining it. I feel like I've been really slow to pick this up, but I'm starting to understand.
Not at all, Oleg. It's actually it's a really good question, and it's something that is still this industry is still figuring out. It's a lot of people just kind of speculate on tokens. They hope they'll go up in value. Utility tokens like ETH or like Braintrust, have real value inside of a network, through their control mechanisms.
So let's move to the closing section. To recap, what's one thing about Braintrust that you'd say really makes you stand out? I have my own thoughts, but yeah, let's hear from you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really it's kind of the theme we've been talking about today. It's the fact that it is completely controlled. Its future is completely controlled by the users that make their living on it, as opposed to a company trying to take as much money out of it as possible.
Yeah, I was going to answer with it's the world's first user-owned network. I mean, are there other people doing this? Are there other user-owned networks?
I would argue Ethereum and Bitcoin are user-owned networks, because the thing about it, there is no Bitcoin Inc. There's no headquarters for Ethereum. There's no, there's miners on both those networks that are helping support the network, just like our talent and our connectors and our clients help support the Braintrust network. But the networks themselves, right? They're not corporations, so they are by definition user-owned in my mind. Braintrust is, as I think, a novel implementation for knowledge workers, right? For connecting, knowledge workers with gigs.
Talk about some of your challenges as a founder. What are some of the challenges that keep you up at night? What are you thinking about constantly?
Well, I'll tell you the biggest challenge is telling this story in a succinct way, which is why I'm very, very happy to do podcasts like yours. I think, the long form, the way you're doing it and others in our space is a great way to tell this story. You have to tell it through analogies, which is why I have so many analogies up my sleeve. But the biggest challenge we have is getting this into a bite-sized thing that normal folks can understand and get excited about. Right, that's our job here.
Definitely. Well, we did the 1 hour version today. We'll maybe think about doing a 15-minute podcast sometime down the line.
Love it.
What's your last question here? What's your best guess on the timing for a better blockchain-enabled future? When is this stuff going to really be here and in our hands and part of our daily lives?
Well, it's if you're a talent on Braintrust making your living here today, it's in your life right now. If you're Nike, it's in your life right now. There's some article published a couple of weeks ago saying Nike is now in blockchain and they may not even know it, referring to Nike being a client of Braintrust. And so, but look, we're still small, right? This is, the network's doing tens of millions, eventually hundreds of millions of dollars in gross service volume. A drop in the bucket compared to the $1.5 trillion of global IT outsource spend. So, that's the old quote, right? The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
I love that. Awesome. Well, before we get out of here, Adam, what's the best way for our listeners to reach you and maybe learn a little bit more about Braintrust?
Yeah, sure. I am on Twitter at Adam Jackson SF. and braintrust.com.
Yeah, I'll plug the blog section. It really helped in preparing for this, and I feel like I've learned a little bit about blockchain and how everything works. Um, so definitely check that out. All right, we're going to end the show there. If you liked our show, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and please leave us a rating. Adam, thank you for joining the show today. We appreciate your time, your insights, and this better future that you are building.
Really enjoyed the discussion. Great talking with you, Oleg. Thank you for having me.